Welcome to the Profitable Farmer Podcast, where it's all about increasing the profitability of your farm by working smarter, not harder.
G'day and welcome once again to Profitable Farmer. I hope this season is playing out for you wherever you are listening from around Australia. In this podcast, I'm delighted to introduce two incredible pioneers and leaders of our industry. The first is a serial entrepreneur who I've come to know recently and just rate so highly as a business leader and human. And the second has more letters after his name than I knew existed. Truly a world leader in this topic for this podcast. In this podcast, I'd like to focus in on, I'm delighted to focus in on, I've been looking forward to this conversation on ag tech, on automation in agriculture, and on robotics. So with that in mind, firstly, I'd like to introduce Gaethan Cutri from Cutri Fruit in Swan Hill. Gaethan, as I say, is an amazing entrepreneur and businessman. He took on the family fruit business 13 years ago. And over that time, that business has grown nearly tenfold, grown from one site to 4 sites, and now exports fruit globally to major food chains and markets around the world. He is, as I say, an incredibly natural leader and an amazing agricultural entrepreneur. He has a vision for his business to be the first autonomous stone fruit farm in the world. And his passion for that vision arrived him to a meeting and now a friendship with Salah Sukkarieh. Now, Salah, who is also to join us today, is the Professor of Robotics and Intelligent Systems at the University of Sydney and is also the CEO of Ageris, which is a new ag tech startup from the ACFR developing autonomous robotics solutions to improve agricultural productivity and environmental sustainability. He was Director, Research and Innovation at the Australian Centre of Field Robotics from 2017 until 2018, where he led the strategic research and industry engagement program in the world's largest robotics institute. He is an international expert in the research, development, and commercialisation of field robotic systems and has led a number of robotics and intelligent systems R&D projects in logistics, commercial aviation, aerospace, education, environmental monitoring, agriculture, and mining. Salah was awarded the New South Wales Science and Engineering Award for Excellence in Engineering and Information and Communications Technologies in 2014. The 2017 CSIRO Eureka Prize for Leadership in Innovation and Science, and was a 2019 New South Wales Australian of the Year nominee. Salah is a fellowship of the Australian Academy of Technological Science and Engineering and has over 500 academic and industry publications in robotics and intelligent systems. So in this podcast, I'm delighted to explore where ag tech, automation and robotics have come from and what developments we've seen play out over the last 10 years, and importantly, what we have to look forward to by way of ag tech and automation across our industry and our enterprise. So it is with that all in mind, and I hope I've done their introductions justice, that I welcome both Gaethan and Salah to our podcast.
Thanks,
Jeremy. Real honour.
Perfect. Gaethan, if I could just start with you, I'm really keen for our listeners to get a sense of Cutri Fruit and your background. Would you mind sharing where is the business now, perhaps compared to where it was when you purchased it from your family 11 years ago?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jeremy. So Cutri Fruit, I'm pretty sure, is the largest grower of stone fruit in the country. We're based in Swan Hill. When I think of Cutri Fruit, I kind of think more than just a farm, because we're built into a lot of different areas. So just so I can follow this process, I'll say we'll start with production. So we grow nectarines, peaches, plums and avos. We have over 400,000 trees. It's probably a big number, but it actually is massive to me because it's nearly 8 times more than when I started this with Nicole and my parents 14, 15 years ago. Back then we were only farming in one location, Warraneen. That's not even our main location anymore. We're now spread across 4 locations. They're probably up to 80 kilometres apart. Back then we only really grew peaches and nectarines, so it's actually changed a fair bit. We started growing plums, then we got excited, and now we actually grow some really unique fruits. We grow some green plums, yellow plums, watermelon plums. We've got our own avocado that's non-oxidizing. So we've really changed the spread of things we grow. We used to only harvest for 4 months. Now we harvest our stone fruit for a bit more than 6 months, and we've trying to utilize our equipment and machinery and people and every part of the business. So we've actually tried to expand our seasons. We've gone into avocados. So we now grow avocados, which gives us another 3 months. When I came back, like nearly every other farm, and we were growing in a traditional model, the trees had limbs growing everywhere, and every tree was different. Now our trees are really uniform. In fact, we've taken it to such an extreme now where we really have, like, our plums are grown on bamboos. So everything's in a 2D structure now. Not everything, all our new plantings are in a 2D structure, where the canopy is only probably 30 centimetres wide as opposed to a 2 metre wide canopy in the old system, which allows us to access everything, hopefully for robotics, but also for mechanics and just for the staff. And we've just gone crazy on consistency. So I love numbers, as you know. I love KPIs and metrics to measure things. So our branches now are 27.5 centimetres apart and perfectly straight. And it's a pretty cool growing system. So if I think of production, our packing facilities, I think it's really lean compared to most that I've seen around the world. It's not the best by any stretch of the imagination, but it has some really cool tech in there and some really cool things. Like we have a vision system that takes 120 photographs of every piece of fruit, and the maximum capacity we're putting through 4,800 fruits a minute. Like, it's insane. It is to me anyway. So, and in terms of systems, yeah, I think when I came back, I'd say we were really just a family farm. It was me, mum, dad, Nicole, my wife. We had heaps of great people with us too, but we were doing the pruning, doing the thinning, doing the picking, doing the packing, doing the sales. It's nothing like that anymore. Now, most of my family members have left. I've recruited my brother-in-law from Sydney, thank goodness. But we just actually have some really great people in our business. A lot of them better at doing the doing than me. So it's a huge change there. We've got heaps of numbers around our business. Our key economic driver is profit per tree. So we've just, every way we can improve that, we've built metrics around it. Initially really difficult, but made them simple now. I feel like I'm talking too much, Jeremy, so we might just wind it up there. But we also, back when I came in, there's probably one other really important thing. We sent our fruit to others, and just we didn't have direct relationships with customers outside the wholesale market. Now in Australia, we're a vendor to Coles, Woolies and Costco. Each of them great partners. We also have great partnerships overseas. We're a direct exporter. And so our business has pivoted a lot and moved a lot over those years. And we also clearly, we're really excited about robotics and moving towards that as well now.
Thanks, Gaethan. I mean, for me, it's just such an amazing example of what can be achieved over a 10 or 15-year time frame. I mean, it is unbelievable just to hear some of those innovations and advancements. What do you take as being the key milestone growth steps, if you like, over that 11 or 15-year period?
Yeah, there's been a heap. Probably because I'm meant to be focusing on ag tech, I'll try and focus on the ag tech ones. And they're just things that allowed us to scale. So there wouldn't be many farms still to this day of stone fruit in Australia that are probably greater than 200 acres. I think we're farming more than 1,000, and I don't have brothers and sisters and everyone involved. And like, I am fortunate, I do have my brother-in-law who's fantastic, and I've got some amazing staff, but really we've done it by using better systems. So back to your question, what are the milestones? Probably the first one was we moved to automated irrigation. So it seems like everyone thinks they've got an automated irrigation system, but they probably have irrigation scheduling. And we've just taken it a step further, and that actually changed our business. Like we moved from probably 10 megs a hectare down to about 4. In fact, our best year, I think we were 3.1 megalitres per hectare. So that's just, every single valve on every single farm has a probe, soil moisture capacitance probe, and it's just looking at the different growth stages, phenological stages of growth, and just determining the water requirement for each stage and turning it on and off. It's pretty cool. From there, we also semi-automated the fertigation, like the chemical and fertilizers. Other big milestones, I mean, it's just bringing all those systems in that were really complicated, that I guess I made them really complicated, making them really simple. And probably we spread to a few other locations and that's changed the way I view the world, I think, a little bit, because we had a flood straight after I bought the farm. And so even though I probably inherited 50 or 60,000 trees, we lost most of them in the first 6 months. And so it forced us to grow a nursery, and we learned how to grow a nursery, and we had to find another location. And it's just opened my eyes up to the opportunities, and also the way I thought to scale needed to have really great systems. And in terms of ag tech again, getting back to the milestone, probably the implementation of like the entire factory, like the way we've made it leaner and leaner, and brought in like the vision system. And in terms of how good that is, I mean, it's let us, we used to pack like a container a day, 40-foot container a day in probably 8 to 10 hours, probably had 20 plus staff. We now have 40 staff, and we can pack a 40-foot container every hour and a half. So the tech makes a huge difference. We also, like the R&D test block, like traveling the world and seeing that everyone's growing in the same way. And we had there are some pretty cool things happening around the world, but essentially everyone's growing, not thinking about what the world will look like in 20 years when robotics are real, when even mechanization of some of the parts are more prevalent. So doing the R&D test block was probably one of the coolest things that's happened for us. We just got excited and started like with one growing system. Then we ended up there's probably 20 or 30 growing systems in a 4-hectare block, and changing the spacing between limbs, how wide the canopy is, how we prune, how we thin to make that happen, just also that we can adopt the technology when it comes.
Gaethan, just amazing to hear you speak to some of those advancements. And I know there's a lot of other ones. Setting up an export business, there are so many other milestones that you and I have spoken about. Salah, you've come to know Gaethan and Cutri Fruit quite well. What's your take on their business and its sophistication from a technology standpoint?
I think fundamentally, I mean, what has it been? 8 years, Gaethan, or something like that? Maybe 10 years, something like that. So I think it's when we first had contact. I mean, the business is an extension of Gaethan, if that makes sense. Gaethan to me is that personification of energy and passion, and you see that in the business. So when I've gone to the farm and been there, I've seen the tech, and I've seen what he's done to the trees and to the farming process and the systems. But more importantly is how that knowledge and that idea and that passion, that energy has been empowered into the team around him. And so wherever you go on farm and you're talking about something, you can see that within the team itself. So when they're looking at a tree and they're judging, once I was there and they were judging how many flower buds there were on a particular limb and why that particular tree had more flower buds than another tree that was right next to it. And so they were down to that level. It wasn't just Gaethan, it was everyone talking about that process. And what did that mean about pruning? What did that mean about what they thought they were going to do when it came to thinning later? What should they do? How should they? So the whole process kicked in, and I think that that wasn't just this mental thinking, but also then what technology they were going to use, and whether it was something they already had in the shed, or whether it was something that they were going to buy from the local hardware and modify it and put it onto the tractor, or whether it was something that they had to go out somewhere and find it. So that thinking process was continuous and all the time, and I think that was what really got me. It wasn't the fact that they were just looking at the latest ag tech cool toy or something like that people were talking about. It was just constant improvement, and that constant improvement always came back to what technology they could use. Is it something already available, something they could modify, or something you had to get? And that was that constant thinking process.
Yeah, which is amazing, to create a culture where our people are so engaged in the improvement process, isn't it?
It is. I remember talking to a farmer once, and not Gaethan, someone else, and that farmer was telling me that the one thing that he noticed difference as he was growing his operation was how important culture was. It's something that he didn't appreciate earlier on when he was going through the business, but as the team grew and as he wanted the business to grow, it was such a focus on culture. And the thing that he said to me was that when you start to identify culture as a key element in that business growth and that business strategy, what you find is when you go to an organisation, a company, a business that you feel has embedded culture within it, then generally just speaking to the leader will tell you a lot about the rest of the staff, and that was, and vice versa. And I think that was an interesting insight from that, and that's what you see on Gaethan's farm. The people around Gaethan. I don't need to talk to Gaethan. I can go to any one of his other. I wouldn't even call them employees, as I think Gaethan is an extension of his family, really. And you go to speak to any of them, and you can kind of see the passion that Gaethan has embedded in them.
Great comment, Salah. Thank you. In all of that journey, and if you reflect now, Gaethan, on where you arrived to, what are you most proud of in what you've achieved at Cutri Fruit?
Yeah. I think about it. I think I kind of view success the same way as you guys down at Farm Owners Academy. You call it a freedom farm. For me, it's years of reading books and kind of finding the same path. And I was kind of always thought about it as a business that runs better without me than with me. And so to me, the proudest achievement is the fact that it literally can run without me on a day-to-day basis now. And it has. Various times. I just had 3 months out during the harvest. So it's to me, that's really exciting. I still give direction on and oversee like new initiatives and innovation. But in terms of the day-to-day functions of pruning, thinning, picking, packing, sales, I'm not really that involved in any of them anymore. Like I help do the production budget with the GM of orchards, but that's pretty much my extent of my involvement. So I'm just really fortunate to have a great team. So that's the great team around me is probably one of the massive things. Just got amazing people. And for me, I also really love numbers and metrics and consistency. And so once we worked out our key economic drivers, profit per tree, it's all those systems that go around it, like we've been able to build. I've always wanted live dashboards, and I feel we've got that now, and we've done really well through Power BI. We're very fortunate to have my brother-in-law, who's our CFO, and just a complete Excel whiz, which has allowed us to grow in that area too. And that, to me, that's something that's one of the things that I view as being really successful. And if I don't know, I'm answering more than just one, but the people have entrusted us to hold some of what I think are the exclusive rights to some of the best tasting varieties in the world. Yeah, those things are really important. I mean, we also want to have a consumer-facing brand, and it's been part of our BHAG for a really long time. And we've really, I think last year we released Galaxy Fruits flavour out of this world, and that's where we want to put our unique fruits, and it did really well. Like, it's won a lot of awards for marketing and branding, and yeah, I don't know, it's a long answer, but there's a lot of things that I'm really excited about. So,
coming back to Salah's comment, how do you do culture, and how do you reflect on having it that your team are as invested and engaged in the business and its improvement as you are?
So on that, I think we've been really fortunate. I think we put in when we put in the values, I mean, I know farm owners like to talk about values, everyone does. I actually thought they were just crap at the start, and I did them because that's what I think the Rockefeller habits told me to do, and I just didn't believe it for a long time. But I made the values with the team at the time, thinking about what's special about each of those people, and they're the things I want to replicate through the business. And over the years, it's now something we live and breathe, and we actually do our performance reviews, everything we call it A players, B players, and C players. The metrics are, the axis are alignment of values and level of skill, and that's how we've really worked out who are the people we want to employ, who are the people we want to promote. And I guess that one of our values is challenging the status quo. So we just start looking for people who want to be better every day. And yeah, the culture to us is everything, and those values have become really important. We don't just talk about them anymore, we now live them.
Gaethan, would you mind sharing the vision that you have for the business and perhaps what that means to you?
So I guess I formed our vision 10, 15 years ago by just traveling the world, trying to find a better way to farm, continuing to learn. And what I saw as I traveled around is that Australia is already one of the leaders in ag. I went to Spain, saw some amazing stuff, Italy, but I went to Israel, California, New Zealand. And what I saw is that actually in stone fruit, we are one of the best, but it still wasn't good enough for what I see coming in the future, where like Australia's, we're competing against some of the cheapest fruits in the world in our time slot. So at that point, I decided that when I really stepped back, what we were trying to achieve is we wanted to be the world's first autonomous farm. And it's something that I just really dream about all the time. And I think Australia is so well placed to be that country. And I think Cutri Fruit is so well placed to be that business. And that's what I keep just striving for. So if you step back and you think about who we compete against, we're competing against Chile, South Africa. These countries have really low wages, and we're probably the country with one of the highest wages in the world. We also just have a really small base of locals who want to do this work. We're one of the least densely populated countries in the world. I mean, it's really hard to find labour, and we're competing at that pointy end where it is all about price, even though we like to think we've got a better quality, and I'm sure that we do as I travel markets and look. It's still about price. And it's about, to get a better product, to be the first autonomous farm is kind of what we came up with, because it means we get better execution, more consistent execution, and over time we can lower the price. So in order to be the world's first autonomous farm, I think we have to do a couple of things. We have to come up with some of the orchard architecture, because there's not a lot out there that allows robotics to really be implemented into the orchards. And yeah, so that's what we've worked really hard on doing.
Gaethan, I'm willing to predict that it's in pursuit of that vision that you sought out and came to know Salah. How did you come to know him? And perhaps for our listeners, how would you describe him?
So I actually don't remember how I met Salah, but what I do remember is reading some articles that he wrote and seeing some publicity on him, and knowing that I wanted to have the world's first autonomous farm. I thought, well, this guy's the most advanced in robotics in our country. So I just picked up the phone and rang him. And I just wanted to know what his thoughts would be on what a future farm would look like in order to be robot ready. So I just picked his brains and then got to work at building it for probably another 3 or 4 years. And then didn't talk to him in between. And then I think I picked up the phone again and going, all right, I've nailed it, Salah. What are we doing now? Let's get these bots on the farm. I don't remember exactly how it went, but it was something like that over a lot of years. And since then, I would say Salah's a really good friend now. And how would I describe Salah? Like, he's clearly super smart, but he doesn't impose that on you. Like, what I love about Salah is just really calm, considered, all the things I'm not, and actually just listens intently to every conversation and loves to learn like I do, but is obviously at a different level. Just a really cool story about Salah. I was actually at Berlin Fruit Logistica probably, I'm not sure, maybe 2 years ago, just before COVID, and I was listening to an ag tech, some guys speaking, and they're meant to be some of the best in the world. And inside their presentation, they had some stuff that Salah was doing, which is pretty cool. And I'd asked a few questions, and afterwards they came up to me and had a chat with me. And these guys are some of the leaders in the world of ag tech. And yeah, I said, hey, I'm working with Salah on some stuff. And the praise they had for Salah was just unbelievable. So until that point, I obviously knew he was really good for Australia, but I probably didn't really appreciate that he's one of the absolute leaders in this space in the world, particularly in open field robotics. So yeah, that's how I describe Salah.
Thanks, Gaethan. I feel very privileged to have you on the call, Salah, so thank you. Do you have anything else that you reflect on by way of automation and ag tech and its application at Cutri Farms before perhaps we expand the conversation?
I think what Gaethan kind of presented exactly what happened. I just got this phone call. I was at my desk, got this phone call, and he was just like, all right, I want to automate my farm. I want to harvest autonomously. And I was like, sorry, who are you? And he's like explaining who he was, and so. And because at that time we had little projects going on, and I thought I'd known the tree crop growers that were mostly interested. And then I said to him that you could spend the next 10 years trying to worry about how to do harvesting and whatever it might be, but really you've got to focus on the structure of your farm. That if you can put some structure into the farm, then that makes automation a lot easier, regardless of what you want to do at the end of it all. And he said, okay, what does that mean? And I said, well, probably start with your trees, and if you can make it easier on and think about just placing flowers and fruit and whatever it might be, etc. And he was all right, okay, good. Close the phone, and I was like, okay, I don't know who that was, but then I did a bit of search. I thought, oh yeah, okay, so they grow stone fruit. And then, as Gaethan said, about 5 years later, 4 years later, called me up and he said, okay, where are they? And that's just what got the conversation going. And I was like, well, okay, where are the robots? Well, okay, so what have we done? And he goes, oh, I've done all these choices. I'm growing, their fruits popping out, we're harvesting, and I want these bots on the farm. And I think it just went from there. And I think it was, I think what Gaethan highlighted is really the fundamentals of automation and what it means to agriculture, which is we can only make this work if we get a bit more structure around the architecture of the farm, because otherwise you're building platforms, sensors, algorithms, whatever it might be for every single type of grower, different type of, say, it could be the same commodity, but just a different farm structure. And that just complicates things. So if you can architect the farms in a certain way that makes automation easier to come in, then you have a much better solution. And I think what Gaethan's doing is just leading in that process. And a lot of people are following now, and which is good. And I think that helps.
Thanks, Salah. So just in your work and your travels over the last 10 years, how do you describe where ag tech and agricultural automation has come from and progressed to?
Yeah, not many people realise that Australia has, outside of agriculture, Australia has led the world when it comes to automation, outdoors field automation. So mining, aviation, logistics, stevedoring. You can go around the country and you can see autonomous 60-ton vehicles, 400-ton vehicles moving around, moving things and interacting with humans in that space. And not only, and that's not R&D, that's commercialized and showing reduction in costs and improving productivity, etc. So agriculture being what it is in terms of the margins that farmers face compared to something like mining means that you had to wait until the technology costs started to drop in order to be able to introduce that type of technology into agriculture. And that probably started to happen about 10, 15 years ago. So my first implementation was on drones in agriculture, and then that moved to ground robotics. So about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, again in Australia, we were one of the first. Probably the US was another group that was doing it, but we were one of the first in the world to start to look at throwing a ground robot onto a farm, whether that was a tree crop farm or a veggie farm or whatever it might be. But then over the last 5 years, as the technology cost has come down even further and it's become a little bit easier to implement, we're seeing a lot more of this activity happening. It's probably still a while to go, mainly because of the cost drivers, but we saw a lot more of this activity happening. And I think over the next 5-10 years, you'll start to see a lot more commercial automation processes happening beyond just, let's say, broadacre, where it's a little bit easier in broadacre because it's very flat terrain, open skies, nothing around, so it makes it a little bit easier. But in other areas as well, in other agriculture areas as well.
Salah, what are some examples of that automation applied outside of agriculture that I guess you've been part of and that most excites you? I've spoken to, I think, some shipping and some mining examples, but what are some examples just for our listeners to consider?
Yeah. If you go to Port Brisbane, Port Sydney, Port Melbourne, you'll find autonomous straddle carriers running around, picking up containers and moving it from one place to another. So these are 60-ton platforms, 15 metres high, no drivers, 15, 20, 30 of them running around moving containers. All that technology was developed in Australia, came out of the research lab that I led and for a while there, and then got commercialized through those companies and industries, and then led the world in that space. Same process with mining. So Rio Tinto, you go out to the Pilbara, you'll have 400-ton haul trucks moving around, drill rigs that are autonomous, water carts that are autonomous, and what you start to see is the assets themselves being automated. But now what's more important is optimizing the whole supply chain, because now you're starting to get a bit more predictability because these assets are moving around and it's predictable in terms of where they go next, and so supply chain optimization becomes important. But even outside of robotics, even the algorithms that we've implemented, so for example on drones, we had a 10-year program with Qantas where we redid their flight planning system to get better fuel-efficient routes. And so the Sydney to New York, Sydney to London flights that you would have heard about last year came out of the algorithms that we developed again in the lab, put into the Qantas platform. So there's a lot that's happened. I mean, Australia's just so far away from everything, low density. Nobody wants to work, and everybody wants to live on the beaches. Nobody wants to work in the middle of the country. So the natural tendency towards automation to stay competitive is across all industries in this country, and agriculture is starting to see that now.
Why is it, do you think, that Australia is pioneering and at the forefront of this?
It's competition, I think, which is the international market is quite competitive across all areas, and I guess the drive of the Australian in terms of being able to just kind of be great in what they want to do, and that feeds all the way through into the business operations as well. And so if you want to excel locally and globally in this country, it's part of that process to think about how do you reduce costs but also improve productivity to kind of deal with that international competitiveness. And automation has just been in that thinking all along. And I think naturally, literally, in terms of the environment that we live in, there's a lot of logistics going on. There's a lot of things we dig out of the ground. There's a lot of things we grow. And that's in areas that nobody wants to work. And if you want to maintain that and do that, you've got to deal with automation in some way. And I think that's also been a natural tool set, I guess, that miners, farmers, logistic individuals, whatever it might be, have focused on as well.
Salah, it's one thing to say that automation has advanced across lots of industries, but how much innovation has happened around sort of the intelligent systems and the robotics behind the achievement of that automation? What actually happens behind the scenes by way of programming and algorithms and advancements in robotics? Would you just give an insight as to, I guess, what you're seeing behind the scenes that makes all this possible?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, because I think a lot of people, initially I remember getting up on stage 11 years ago, I think it was to a vegetable, so it was an Australian vegetable industry conference, and talking about the potential for robotics on farm. And I wouldn't say I was booed off stage, but you kind of laughed at it a bit, because there was no way that robotics was going to work on a farm, and there was all these issues and whatever it might be. And if you see what's happened, you get some pioneer leaders within the field who say, no, we should be able to do this. And then you couple that with the reduction in cost and technology. And the key elements that I think have turned what I would call throwing a GPS on a platform is one thing. So you're just making a platform go up and down rows and whatever it might be is one thing. But to then add intelligence into the platform requires some key fundamental things. One is, you notice on your phone or your laptop, the cost is getting cheaper or staying the same, but the power and the sensing technology is getting better. You can mimic that into robotics as well. So cost of computing is getting cheaper, cost of memory, computing memory is getting cheaper, but also more expansive. Communications is getting better. And that allows computer scientists to sit there and go, well, you know what, that algorithm that we never thought would ever work 10 years ago can now work on a platform. So 10 years ago, I put a camera and I tried to detect an orange on a tree in my lab, and that would take a picture, and then 5 minutes later, the thing would say, oh, there's an orange there. Well, now I can put a camera on a platform and I can run down a row and it can detect 100 oranges on a tree in real time as you're going through. And that's could be the same algorithm. It's just now that the computing processing is getting a lot more powerful, memory is getting more expensive. And so we're getting that capability kind of feed in. And so that's the thing about robotics. It's what they call a combinatorial systems engineering problem, because you have many things that have to come together to make a robot work. And any advancement in any one of those things can significantly improve the intelligence of the platform. So whether you improve comms or whether you improve memory or computing, you get this more intelligent robot the day after.
I've studied a little bit of Buckminster Fuller, Salah, and he talks about ephemeralization. And the way that I understand that is that with progress, structural change is happening exponentially quicker, and they kind of build on each other so that our rate of change and our rate of advancement is exponentially or getting exponentially quicker. What you were just describing then kind of speaks to that advancements in so many components of where your focus is allowing for innovation to unfold in front of us at a greater and greater rate. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah. I think technology. So a robot in whatever form you want to think of is a combination of many pieces of technology. Each one of those pieces of technology goes through its own exponential growth. It gets more powerful, quicker, cheaper, better, whatever it might be. And then the addition of that component with another component is not 1 + 1 = 2. You get this kind of significant nonlinear effect that happens when you kind of add these components together. And if one component gets better, so for example, if computation gets so much better on a computer, it challenges then communications, and people then drive communications even further. And then that challenges memory capacity on the robot, and that drives. So you then get this individual exponential growth, and you get the combination of all that coming together in a very non-linear fashion, which is why, 2 years ago you would have said that would never work, and now you're thinking, well, okay, you can do so much more now with that same technology. So it's definitely an exponential and combinatorial effect that you're seeing when it comes to robotics.
Which absolutely means what we'll see over the next 20 years will just be so much more rapid in advancement than what we've seen over the last 20.
Yeah, but the challenge is always, how do you make it commercial and how do you make it work for the operation? So it's great that you can build a robotic platform that looks like a dog, walks like a dog, runs and acts like a dog, and you kind of see this in some of the defense robotics work. But then if you had to say, well, that would be great on my farm, for example, to do X, Y, Z, keep the feral animals away or whatever it might be, then you're talking about, a $3 million platform, and it just doesn't make sense in that context. So it's really now this process of sitting back and going, take the technology out of the picture because it's there and it exists. If I looked at a farm now, where do I want that farm to be in 5 years' time? And then hence what technology do I need to start introducing into that process to make that work? So it's kind of taking the fascination away from the eye candy of robots and kind of thinking about what does it mean to automate a farm and what technology needs to come together for all that. And so that you make the economics work.
Which links back to, I guess, Gaethan, you having that pioneering vision about wanting to be the first and best automated stone fruit farm in the world, and then looking at making automation happen commercially so that you could justify improvement across your business.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what's driven us, and I realise that it's a slow burn to get all these things happening. There's so much that needs to happen at Salah's level and everyone else's. But what I'm hoping is if we just build the platform and keep improving our orchard architecture, then when the tech's available, we're the company that people look to.
Gaethan, what comes up for you, or have you got a question for Salah based on what we've talked about so far?
No, not really, but I think a really good point for me, like, is I love watching YouTube videos and everything of the tech that's coming out, and I must send videos and emails to Salah way too often. But when you see him, you think all this stuff is real and it's happening all over the world, and there's other people with autonomous harvesters and herbicide units, but a lot of that actually isn't it's not commercial. So, and to make it commercial, there's so much that needs to happen both at Salah's end and at the farming end. So I'm not sure if I've really answered that question, but I think what I've learned over the journey is there's just so many moving parts, and what you see in the social media isn't necessarily what's actually happening. And I realise Salah and his team are actually at the forefront. So no real questions.
I think just on that, I think the farming processes and systems at one end, and the technology and its ability to do things at another end. And the gap in between is not the technology or the farming system. It's the mechanisms that you put in place to bring that technology onto farm. And there's an economic understanding. There's an educational element that has to happen. There's training elements that have to happen. And you have to do it in a way that gives a return on investment to the farmer incrementally as they're going through, because automation is not a simple thing. You really got to sit back and go, the process or the thinking may be simple, but you're rethinking the way your farm is going to operate. And that requires the technologists, the systems thinkers, the farmers, the agronomists to all come around the table and start to think about, well, what is the first thing that we want to put on farm that leads us down that journey? And tying with that, okay, what is the ROI on that? Do I need to train people up? What's the service and maintenance look like? Will that happen on my farm? What if I don't have comms? Is it, what happens when it's foggy one day, bucketing rain the next day, etc.? And all those things have to get addressed. And maybe the technology's not ready for it, but maybe operationally you can make it still work, because it could be that, the robot can't go out after we've irrigated, so we'll send the robot out 2 hours before it's irrigated, as opposed to let's build the robot again in a different way so that it can work when I want to irrigate. So there's a bit of thinking that has to happen around that, but it's not a technology and it's not a farm process, but it's in between that.
Yeah, and further, I think it really is a partnership. I'm not saying that I'm a partner with Salah or his company, but it actually takes both sides. I think, so as I've met a lot of Salah's team over the past few years, we all see things from a different vantage point, and they think they're solving a problem over here, but it's actually not really a problem for us. The problem's here. And so I think it needs to be a really collaborative approach. Otherwise, the wrong things are tackled, and there might be easier gets. So that's probably one of the things I've learned, and I probably hassled Salah a little bit too much over the years for it, but I just want to make sure that we're really streamlined and we're not moving sideways instead of moving forwards.
What are your team working on in the agri sector, and what are you excited about over the next 3 and 5 and even 10 years about what perhaps both intensive and broadacre farming can look forward to?
So I think that we'll answer that in probably 3 different bits. So at the moment now, the biggest challenge for us and the most excitement for us now is how do we get the current robotic technology onto the farm? And that really is around what are the commercial mechanisms that you put around the technology to facilitate that introduction onto farm, and to get the farmers to bring in that technology, knowing full well that it's a long journey through there. The thing that I think over the next few years that will become really interesting to see is going to be some novel actuation devices. This is probably the thing that I think is of most interest, regardless of what type of industry we're talking about. And what I mean by that is the robots, whether they're automated tractors or whether they're some other small system platform, they're there. The sensing we've known about for a long time. The machine learning or artificial intelligence that sits on the sensing allows us to detect individual plants or crop growth rates or whatever it might be. They're there. But what's going to be really interesting is little tools that we end up building that are very smart and are very capable, mimic human flexibility, dexterity, etc., that allow us to do things such as pruning, thinning, harvesting, selective harvesting, even pest removal, along with the pest detection, but in a very, very localized, specialized. And I think over the next few years, we're going to start seeing more of these tools sit on platforms that are going to be really interesting. Beyond that, the thing that I think is going to change and morph is I'm going to have to go a little. When I look at a fruit or a plant or even an animal, they're biological in nature, but inherently in there's code. There's DNA code in some form, and there's information content, and that information content goes from that seed or that plant or that animal all the way through to the operations that you have. So even when you start to look at farming operations, you're talking about information flow going to the robot, which has got sensors that's pulling in that information as well. So I think about as we go along, we start to automate, and you're going to start to see R&D focus less on robotics and more on, well, what does it mean to kind of capture that information flow from seed to harvest and all the way through to sensing and the types of tools that you use. And that's going to help optimize, again, the production process and productivity. But that's a longer term 10-year horizon. So getting robots on the farm now commercially, looking at some really interesting tools that will happen over the next few years. And then beyond that, what does it mean to kind of capture the whole information flow on farm?
Yeah.
What is the process to commercialise, and how do we arrive to a point practically with an individual farm business that they can determine that this actually does pay? It does drive appropriate efficiencies and cost savings so that it does make sense to implement?
I think, well, it's probably both for me and Gaethan. I think from my perspective, the cost of the technology will be and is probably now a no-brainer for many farmers. So if the technology would just come out of the box and work, farmers would, I think, in many cases, whether it's for things like weeding or spraying, even moving commodities around, thinning, pruning, harvesting, I think farmers will see the ROI very, very quickly. The cost, however, is not in the technology, but in the bringing the technology to farm and making it work on farm, because you still need a support crew around that, whether that's engineering talent, technical talent, maintenance and service. And that's where the cost is at the moment now. So until the bots can be fully automated, out of a box, etc., you're going to see the commercialization process really focus on the economic vehicle that takes that technology and puts it onto farm. In reverse, though, it's, I think what Gaethan was touching on before, is what we're seeing now is a lot of people who know how to write an algorithm or know how to use a sensor, and they think, I'm going to apply this to agriculture and apply it on a completely different problem that farmers are really interested in. So getting that feedback and getting that information back from the growers, understanding the economics of farming, how do you work out on the ROI, will then drive where that commercial process will happen.
Gaethan, how do you make that decision as to what pays by way of automation compared to continuing to have that activity being labour dependent?
Yeah, it's a really long potential answer. I won't take a long time to answer it because there's so many ways to view the value. And this is something, to me, I mean, I suspect what we think we know about how to farm is just the tip of the iceberg. So if a bot's driving up and down every single day, capturing data, and it can identify the same flower, that turns into the same fruit every second or third day, there's going to be more information than we've ever had. And with machine learning algorithms now, I suspect we'll work out how to get better tonnage, better fruit, higher pack outs just from the information. But the information's one part, and to me, that's actually critical as well. But then we need a way to actually execute on the tasks. And so that's the other part. So the robotics is amazing for that. So how do I do the economics of it? I think that I need any way to start collecting that information. Like the best scientists in the world would only look at the same fruit every day at best. If a bot's driving up and down and it's checking the same fruit over a 12-month period or a 2-year period continually, that we'll learn a whole heap of things. And like I said, and if we could have autonomous bots going up and down, capturing data on the same plant and knowing where that plant and where that lateral, where that limb is, whatever it is, we see a pest at the moment, we treat the whole hectare. It might be that we can actually just put a beneficial in on that one tree or a couple of trees around it, and we might save a huge spray cost. Plus, when we spray, I don't know about other crops, but in tree crops, if we spray to kill pest 1, we generally that we end up getting pest 2. So how do I justify the cost, or how do I view it? I think I want it to be able to do a function that saves me time or money or simplifies the business. But if we can get bots up and down, I mean, someone has to implement them. And I want our business to be the first at it, but I actually think there's some real economic gains as well. So if I just think of herbicide, so we go out and we have to spray, and Salah hates talking about herbicide, but we're talking more about the manipulation of crop. But if I could have a bot that's just driving up and down all day, every day, passing the same blocks, looking and spraying the weeds, but actually capturing information, even if it only covers half my cost of, like if it maybe cost me $2,000 or $4,000 a hectare to herbicide ordinarily with an operator and a tractor and wear and tear. And if a bot can do it, it's all that, I don't know, all that additional information. If we can capture that, I think it could potentially change the game. So when I think about it, I think about how do we get to that 10 years where we actually are better at, we're increasing our yields because of the information that we have. That's a really long answer, sorry, but that's how I justify it.
It's a fascinating answer because, there's so many benefits, aren't there, that, you can significantly reduce herbicide and chemical application, maintenance costs, depreciation, labour savings, as well as, the opportunity for improved efficiency, improved quality. There's so many benefits, and I think you just spoke to that really accurately, so thank you for that. Gaethan, if you jump forward 10 years, all things being equal, and I guess all the advancement that we've touched on playing out, can you possibly describe what Cutri Fruit could look like as a business?
Yeah, so I think we'll definitely still have, let's go 10 years out. So there'll clearly be a huge number of employees still, because I don't think bots are going to take over the world. Definitely not in the next 10 years. But man, it'd be amazing if we could take away the high skilled jobs, like things that are really specialised in tasks or that require to be done at a precise time. So I would hope that in 10 years from now, we are doing exactly like the herbiciding. We're passing the farm between herbiciding, foliar sprays, putting beneficials out, but things that make a bot pass the farm, past that particular tree every day would be amazing. And Salah and I have probably put together about 50 things which are easy gets, even to scaring birds. If we could do all those activities, I mean, it might just save, it might save 25% of our labour, but it also might increase our yield by 25% by reducing losses and that. So probably in 10 years, that's where I see us getting. But I think that robotic harvesting, Salah has sent a team out a couple of times and we've had a couple of goes at it. It's a long way away, but it really depends on the actuators and a few other bits and pieces. But I think that's probably real within 10 years because there's enough people focusing on it for our industry. I think autonomous spraying is real, will be real. I think autonomous fertilising. So what we currently do is we fertigate an entire block, so a valve. So it might be 1 hectare, 2 hectares, 4 hectares, but there might only be 2 trees in that hectare that require treatment. The same with insecticides. That in itself it just makes a healthier tree, a healthier fruit, and it just gives our industry a better name. And yeah, I think they're not easy gets, but they're the gets that I think that will happen within the next 10 years and that will actually transform the industry. Because I think we'll transform ag. If we can, if Salah and others around the world can really capture heaps of data on that one leaf and one fruit or the one tree, every bit of data, like across, imagine if you had that across the entire farm and then you ran some machine learning algorithms over it. There'd be stuff that we don't even know the relationships of now, and we'd find those relationships. And I think that's real for 10 years. I'm not sure if it is Salah, but that's what I'm hoping is real. And a couple of those easy gets like herbicide and hopefully picking.
Salah, what's your take on what ag could look like 10 years ago or 10 years from now relative to today?
I think there'll be more uniformity, as I mentioned before. There'll be this drive towards automation, and it doesn't need to be robots. It could be just sensors out there and algorithms and whatever it might be. But I think there'll be a bit more uniformity on farm, and I think there'll be a greater awareness about, as Gaethan mentioned before, at the moment now, whether you drive trees to be taller because you get more yield versus, well, actually automation requires shorter trees. You don't get as much yield, but you've dropped down the cost, et cetera, so much that you're getting more profit out of the process. And thinking along those lines will happen as well. But look, the sensors will be cheaper, platforms will be cheaper, potentially less ownership maybe of robotics as well and sensors on farm, more of a service model, things happening like that where farms are really just focusing on supply chain optimization, not worrying about, do I need to go back to this asset and dealing with it and as they currently do. So there might be some rethinking about what it means to have assets on farm, which may make it cheaper and easier for multiple farmers to be able to use automation in different ways. So I think there's economic changes commercial changes that might happen in terms of the access of robotics on farm. But yeah, I agree with Gaethan. Sensors will be everywhere, data will be collected, platforms will be harvesting is in many industries the big end game, but different industries will have different paths to that because the return on investment on weeding may not be the best thing for Gaethan, for example, say compared to a vegetable farm. But if it introduces robotics and automation in the thinking process around autonomy, then that's the right first step to take it as you're going down that pathway.
Salah, for those of our listeners that are really interested to deepen their knowledge and awareness around robotics, automation, and advancements in ag tech, are there publications or journals that you would direct them to so that they can start really building out their level of understanding on this topic?
Yeah, they can speak to Gaethan. He can leave his number out. Look, there's a lot going on I wouldn't say publications. Oh, it depends. If it's scientific or even engineering publications, there's a couple of organisations. One's called IEEE, which is an international organisation and has magazine articles and things like that talk about robotics in general. But then you can do a bit more research and get robotics in agriculture. if you really want to go a bit more systems thinking and understand what's going on in bits, everything from harvesting through to spraying to whatever, there's a journal called the Journal for Field Robotics, and that's what we're talking about here is outdoor systems. But there's a number of web pages, web articles, online articles, or whatever it might be that focus specifically on future farming and what the changes are there. And I think there's a lot going on in that space. But maybe Gaethan, obviously you and there's a community around you too. There's probably certain areas that you look at that kind of give you the latest new technology that's coming through and how it works.
So for me, it is reading a few of the articles that Salah's referred to, those journals, but it's also just YouTubing and just continually Google searching and then exploring further and further, and just keep digging deeper until you find who are the people behind it, then asking some questions.
So guys, I like that construct that sometimes the hardest part to learning and progressing is unlearning and letting go of what we know. I get a sense that there is a requirement for a fairly significant mindset shift, perhaps in some of our conventional farmers, and a letting go of how they've always done farming, and a change in mindset towards how it could be done differently. Gaethan, what do you think is the shift in mindset that might need to happen in our farm business leaders so that they can challenge the status quo and consider a different way of running and advancing their farms?
Yes, I'm not sure what the mindset change is across other industries or even ours, but when I think through the journey, what I've learnt is it probably what you think is the next get doesn't have to be. So if we step back in our industry and everyone's focused on harvest, there's companies all around the world, it might be irrelevant. We don't actually need robots to harvest if we could thin better, because we could get a really uniform fruit size. And then if we're thinning better and looking for more consistent fruits, why not just step back another step and go, well, let's just actually select the flowers that are the most uniform in size, and actually do the thinning back at the flower stage. And then if we do that really well, I think we'll just harvest. We currently harvest the same tree every third day for 5 picks to try and make sure we get everything at the right maturity. By doing it, by stepping back further in the process, what I think will happen in our industry is that picking becomes irrelevant. We can just send people in and pick the whole lot in one big go, because we've pre-selected the fruits that are going to be ripe at the same time, allowing them to get better size, better quality, better yield because of that. So maybe the way I think about it is we can, with robotics and better information, maybe we can actually, instead of thinking what we think is currently the end game, maybe we can actually go back further to get a bigger change.
Be careful focusing on the problem that isn't. It's such a good point, Gaethan. Salah, what's your comment to that?
It's something that we've seen in other industries, even outside of ag, and it's a good point. When you look at your production process, what you're really doing is you're turning information into decision making along that whole production process, right? And that could be when someone's going out there spraying, or when someone's going out there harvesting, or whatever it might be. But what you don't realise is how much information you can accumulate in that process and turning it into decision making. And what we've seen in other industries is when you throw automation in there are certain things along that process that aren't required anymore, because a bot's come in, or a sensor's come in, or an algorithm's come in and nullified the need for that activity. That activity that's probably there because it's always been there, because humans have always been involved in whatever form doing that. And I think what Gaethan's reaching out to in that specific case, which is that, so we are focusing on harvesting because it's the greatest cost to a farm. So it's probably the first thing that they're thinking about is, how do I reduce the cost on that? And the reason why is I'm doing everything that I can possibly do up until I bring in 100 people to start harvesting for me. And I guess what Gaethan's reaching out to is, well, what if you could actually come further up that supply chain and use robotics or AI or sensing and change a certain behavior that's up there that doesn't require me to bring in that many people, or makes it so much easier to harvest, and hence my expenses around harvesting drop anyway. And it's a good point. It's a valid point. We've seen it in other industries, and it's one of those things that, as a roboticist, technology driver, whatever it might be, you don't see. It has to come from the grower's end. And they have to be able to sit back and go, as you pointed out, Jeremy, how do I unlearn what's happening to kind of see where this really should fit in? Because otherwise you're just going with your biggest fear or whatever it might be, and that being, in this case here, expenses at the end.
Thank you. To both of you, I want to sincerely thank you for your time and your pioneering. And you both, in your relative spaces, are true world leaders. And it's a real honour for me to have you both on this podcast and to scratch the surface on ag tech, robotics and automation. Gaethan, to you, just sincere congratulations for what you've achieved in business and in this space, in your business over the last sort of 11 or 15 years. And I think you are at the forefront of our national advancement in this space over the next 10. So look forward to sort of watching your journey. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, Jeremy. Thanks. I don't know if all that's true, but cheers.
And Salah, I did introduce you quite formally at the start, and for a bit of humour, my kids and I love the fact we love Johnny Williamson, the Australian singer, and we love the fact that he's written 500 songs. I can't quite believe that he's written 500 songs, but the fact that you've written 500 papers just blows my mind. I just want to congratulate you on your leadership and the impact you're having nationally and globally at the forefront of all things ag tech, robotics and advancement. So thank you for your time, sincerely.
Well, thank you. It's an honour to be here.
So guys, that's about it from us. I've run out of smart questions because I'm not the smartest bloke in the room, but I hope for our listeners that does give you an insight as to where all things ag tech has come from and what we've got to look forward to. It does challenge us to really stop and look at how we have been doing things and consider a totally different way of moving forward. I think we've all got a small part to play in the advancement of these things in our industry. And I think Gaethan and his family in that business is such a great example of its successful application in agriculture. So, thank you, Gaethan and Salah, again. And to all of you, have a great few weeks. Enjoy this season as it unfolds in front of us. Take care, thank you, and bye for now.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yes.